Thank you very much. I have a question to Radhicka. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's related to a couple of questions. Just one is related to the informality that you have shown us. So you've shown that there is a huge undocumented, unregulated sector in India, right? But even within the formal sector, there might be informal employment. I'm sorry if I have missed it, but I was just wondering if you may give us a hint how large it is, what is the incidence, and how it may impact also the results that you find. And another one is related to the relation between labor regulations and the prevalence of the small-size firms. So if I understood it correctly from your presentation, your data actually exclude the very small firms, right? Or so it's it includes the data includes those firms which has 10 and more employees. So maybe this, the final result that you find for the that you have shown us, this relation with the firm size, may actually be the result, or may relate it also to the sample selection, right? Thank you.
One here.
Just a small question of clarification for Radhicka, and then a question for Ben. It's probably my jet lag, but in your first equation, when you had I think the ratio of contract workers to total workers regressed on the wage gap, and then you had a positive coefficient there, right? But the wage gap was defined the way you wrote it as the contract workers' wages over the other one. So I wasn't sure what the interpretation was that way. So if you could just explain that for me a little bit. And then for Ben, it's a diff and diff specification, right? So it hinges a little bit, of course, on this parallel trends assumption. And you show 2 years before, but not very much more. And I could imagine that wages at the bottom of distribution for agricultural workers and other workers could be quite different beforehand. So do you have any information on that?
I have a question to Ben firstly, then to Peter. I'd like to know if you, in your LFS, because I understood that you used the South Africa LFS for the last part of the presentation. So you have the wage, I suppose, the wage variable. I would like to know if the definition of the wage is the same like the definition of the minimum wage, and then you have the comparison, because you saw also us that you have 124 wage schemes in South Africa. So have you taken into account all of these wage schemes into this analysis? Because I suppose that, as you saw also in the agriculture, that you have different minimum wage for rural areas and urban areas. And have you taken into account this into this modeling? And to Peter, I was wondering if you also, because I really don't know how it is in Silk, how you could use this data, because as I know, we have a different number of hours needed for the full-time for different occupations. For example, teachers has less than the others. So have you taken into account that? Because you also presented some minimum wages by hours. So I was wondering how you could use this data. In Poland, we do not have minimum hourly minimum wage, only monthly. So I would like to know how you could do this.
I think we can end the first round of the questions. If there appear more, we'll come back. And now, can you answer?
So about the question on informality. So we basically have two surveys in India. One is the annual survey of industries, which captures the organized sector. So that's all firms which have more than 10 workers. And then we have the national sample survey, which covers the unincorporated enterprises, that looks at the unorganized sector. And that's a quinquennial survey. So when I looked at the firm size distribution, I was looking just at the organized sector. And the reason for this is that because basically, I mean, in the unorganized sector anyway, all our firms have less than 10 workers pretty much. And the labor regulations don't cover the unorganized sector. So the idea was to see if labor regulations really bite in terms of the firm size distribution. And so that is why we look just at the organized sector over there. And in terms of the informality within the organized sector, that's really captured by the extent of contractualization. So the data that we have basically tells us the number of regular or directly employed workers. It tells you how many workers were hired by contractors and how many are supervisors and managers. So the informality in the organized sector is getting captured by this contractual staff. And the idea behind the wage differential was positive and statistically significant, suggesting that the greater was the wage differential between contract and regular workers, the higher was your share of contract workers. Because the greater was that differential, the more contract workers you wanted to hire because...
So the ratio is the opposite then, right? Because you have contractual wages over total wages. So as that gets higher, the gap gets lower. It's a small point, but we can follow.
Okay, I'll just...
Okay, I'll take the point about the labor force survey first. Yeah, so we have wage data, and we also have occupational data, and we also have information about where you live. So we can place people quite carefully in a rural urban area based on their occupation. So we can match what you should be earning to what you are actually what you report to be earning. The only problem we have is that we know where you live, but you don't say where you work. So if you're living in an area that's far from where you work, then we don't know that difference. So there may be some error there, but in general, so for some sectors, that large number of schedules is driven in particular by two sectors which are extremely complex. So that takes a lot more work, but this was just on agriculture where there are only two schedules. And now, actually, after 2009, there's only one, so that makes things easier. So, of course, for the common trends, so we try kind of a number of different specifications of control groups where and obviously we try to match on characteristics, and we have kind of income cutoffs and things that try as hard as we can to get them to look the same. Our big challenge is, of course, that it's very difficult to find comparable workers who are geographically in similar areas to agricultural workers. So that's, I think, the one thing we really struggled to get around. And in addition to that, this labor force survey only begins in the second quarter of 2000. So we don't have a huge amount of data going back. So that's, I guess, part of the reason why we try to add an additional specification that doesn't rely on that treatment control. Yeah. But we can't obviously do it, as we don't have a panel, so that would be nice.
When it comes to the how do we deal with the hours worked, so we analyze the group of people who actually work the full-time schedule defined as a general full-time schedule of like 40 hours a week. So we don't really have like teachers in the sample actually, because they usually declare that they work less. At the same time, the minimum wage valuation among teachers is not an issue, I would say. So if we recalculate into hourly terms, they actually earn quite a lot. So for Poland and for, let's say, these teachers, I think it's not an issue at all, which would affect the results. There are some countries when it's more serious. Let's say, for example, in Latvia, there is this rule that workers who are working in the dangerous conditions, they should have a working week of 35 hours. At the same time, the dangerous conditions are not defined in any piece of legislation clearly. So it's, let's say, up to the employer to define if a worker has dangerous conditions and then to reduce the working hours per week. So actually we are not really able to deal with that because it's not specified at the national level. It's at discretion of the employer. And also when we try to so let's say it's slightly different than to South Africa, where you have like a clearly defined wage schedules and the minimum wages which relate to particular occupations. In our region, actually, it's different. That when there are countries like Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, which have like sub-minima higher for particular occupations group, it's actually it's almost impossible to identify clearly if they are defined on the basis on the like education level or if they are defined on the basis of the occupations and so on. So we think of them are more as indicative higher levels and basically focus on this basic minimum wage to frame the exercise that we're doing in terms of like underpaying of low-paid workers, rather than just meeting some occupational standards for usually highly skilled groups like teachers.
Have there any new questions emerged, or nothing brings the attention? So I think we'll finish the discussion. And thank you for the presenters. Thank you for the questions. And I think I'm not sure if the lunch is ready, but we can go for the coffee and then move for the lunch. And we invite everybody to be back at 2 for the keynote speaker. Thank you very much.